Bo Jackson hip injury. 1991. Bo Jackson wasn't just an NFL star. He was a cultural phenomenon, a two-sport athlete who dominated both professional football and baseball, something almost no one had done at that level. With the Los Angeles Raiders, he didn't just run past defenders. He ran through them, around them, and away from them like something out of a comic book. But on January 13, 1991, everything changed. In an AFC divisional playoff game against the Bengals, Bo took a routine handoff and exploded down the sideline. As he was being tackled from behind, he tried to keep moving forward, and in doing so, he dislocated his hip. What seemed like a manageable injury at first would turn out to be career-ending. That one play caused a vascular necrosis, a condition where the bone tissue in the hip starts to die due to a lack of blood supply. It destroyed his cartilage and led to severe deterioration in the joint. Bo eventually had to get a hip replacement. He would never play another snap in the NFL. Before the injury, Bo was arguably the most electrifying player in football. He averaged 5.4 yards per carry over 4 seasons, the highest in Raiders history. He made the Pro Bowl in 1990 and had a growing highlight reel filled with jaw-dropping moments, 90-yard sprints, truck stick stiff arms, and baseball outfield throws that didn't seem human. After his injury, the Raiders had to move on, and Bo focused on baseball for a short while. He made a brief MLB return, even hitting home runs with a prosthetic hip. But the Bo Jackson that captured America's imagination was gone. Bo's injury wasn't just a loss for the Raiders. It was a loss for sports as a whole. We never got to see his full potential, and that's what makes it one of the most devastating career-ending injuries in NFL history. Sterling Sharpe, neck injury, 1994. Before his career was cut short, Sterling Sharpe was on a Hall of Fame trajectory. He was strong, fast, and reliable, the kind of wide receiver who could take over a game at any moment. Playing for the Green Bay Packers, he was quarterback Brett Favre's go-to target, before anyone had even heard of Donald Driver or Greg Jennings. But in 1994, everything came to a halt. Sharpe suffered a neck injury that involved an abnormal loosening between the first and second cervical vertebrae, a condition that doctors told him could lead to paralysis if he took another hit. And so, at just 29 years old, Sharpe was forced to retire. What makes this even more tragic is that he had just come off one of the best seasons of his career. In 1992, he became only the 6th player in NFL history to win the receiving triple crown, leading the league in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. In 1993, he caught an NFL record 112 passes at the time. In his final season, 1994, he had 18 receiving touchdowns, tied for the league lead. He was in his prime, and he was done. Sharpe finished with 595 receptions, 8,134 yards, and 65 touchdowns in just 7 seasons. He was a 5-time Pro Bowler, a 3-time All-Pro, and if not for the injury, would have likely joined his brother Shannon Sharpe in the Hall of Fame long ago. Brett Favre would later say that no receiver he ever played with was better than Sterling. His neck injury robbed fans of a legend in the making. But even in a shortened career, Sterling Sharpe left behind a legacy of dominance, one that still gets talked about in NFL circles to this day. Kevin Everett, spinal cord injury, 2007. When Kevin Everett took the field for the Buffalo Bills in Week 1 of the 2007 NFL season, he was living his dream, a tight end who had worked his way up from a JUCO transfer to the University of Miami to the NFL. But just minutes into that game, in the second half kickoff, everything changed forever. Everett went in for a routine tackle on Denver Broncos return man Dominic Hickson. He ducked his head slightly and collided awkwardly. It didn't look gruesome at first, but Everett didn't get up. He wasn't moving, and the stadium fell completely silent. He had suffered a catastrophic spinal cord injury, a fracture and dislocation in his cervical spine. Doctors initially feared the worst, that he might never walk again or even remain paralyzed from the neck down. The injury required immediate emergency surgery, and doctors administered cold saline to reduce swelling in his spinal cord, a cutting-edge procedure at the time. Remarkably, just days later, Everett began moving his limbs, and within months, he was walking again. But football was over. Everett never played another down in the NFL, and while the injury ended his career after just 1 season and 3 games, His recovery became one of the most inspirational medical comebacks in sports history. The Bills honored him throughout the season. He later walked publicly at an ESPN awards show, and his story became a symbol of hope, resilience, and how quickly life in the NFL can change in a single moment. Daryl Davis, knee injuries, 2002. Daryl Davis didn't just rise fast, he skyrocketed. A sixth-round draft pick in 1995, he went from special teams gunner to Super Bowl MVP in just a few years. By the late 90s, he was the beating heart of the Denver Broncos offense and one of the most dominant running backs in the NFL. But just as quickly as he rose, his career was cut short by a series of devastating knee injuries. In 1998, Davis rushed for 2,008 yards, becoming just the fourth player in NFL history at the time to break the 2,000-yard mark. He also scored 23 total touchdowns and was named NFL MVP. The Broncos went on to win back-to-back Super Bowls, and Davis was the workhorse who made it all happen. But in 1999, the tide turned. In Week 4, while trying to make a tackle after an interception, yes, on defense, Davis tore his ACL and MCL. That injury ended his season, and he was never the same again. Over the next 2 years, he battled through chronic knee problems, including microfracture damage and bone-on-bone wear. He attempted multiple comebacks, but the burst, balance, and cutting ability that had once made him so special were gone. In 2002, at just 29 years old, Davis retired. He only played 7 seasons, but in that short span, he racked up over 7,600 rushing yards, 65 touchdowns, and 3 Pro Bowl selections. More importantly, he was one of the most important players in the Broncos franchise history, and a key reason why John Elway finally got his rings. Davis's knees gave out early, but he still made it to Canton. In 2017, he was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, proof that sometimes impact matters more than longevity. Steve Emptman, multiple knee injuries, 1997. When the Indianapolis Colts selected Steve Emptman with the #1 overall pick in the 1992 NFL Draft, they believed they were getting a once-in-a-generation defensive force. Coming out of the University of Washington, Emptman had just won the Lombardi Award and finished 4th in the Heisman voting, an almost unheard-of feat for a defensive lineman. At 6 feet 4 inches, 290 pounds, with elite quickness and power, he was the anchor of a national championship defense. Scouts saw him as the next Reggie White, but the NFL never got to see his full potential, because Steve Emptman's body betrayed him almost immediately. In just his 9th NFL game, he tore the ACL in his left knee, ending his rookie season. A year later, he tore the patellar tendon in his right knee, another devastating injury. In 1994, while playing for the Dolphins, he suffered a herniated disc in his neck. And through all of this, he kept trying to come back, but the damage was done. Emptman played in only 50 career games over 5 seasons, starting 35. His career totals, 8 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 134 tackles, don't tell the story of a bust, but of a guy whose body simply wouldn't cooperate. He gave everything he had to stay on the field, but he was dealing with knee braces, surgeries, and constant rehab from the moment he entered the league. Emptman is often mentioned in conversations about draft busts, but that label isn't fair. It wasn't a lack of talent or drive. It was pure bad luck and brutal timing. He had all the tools to be great. The league just never got to see it. Daryl Stingley, spinal cord injury, 1978. Daryl Stingley was a rising star for the New England Patriots in the 1970s, a gifted wide receiver with speed, toughness, and reliable hands. He was just 26 years old and entering his prime when tragedy struck during a preseason game on August 12, 1978, against the Oakland Raiders. As Stingley leapt for a pass across the middle, Raiders safety Jack Tatum delivered a brutal hit, one that was legal at the time, but left an irreversible mark on the sport. Stingley collapsed instantly and didn't get up. He had fractured 2 vertebrae in his neck and severely damaged his spinal cord. The result was permanent quadriplegia. He would never walk again. The impact of that hit went far beyond one man's injury. It shocked the entire league and sparked national conversations about player safety, the culture of violent hits, and the risks of the game itself. But for Stingley and his family, it wasn't a debate. It was a reality they had to live with every day. What makes his story even more heartbreaking is that he had just signed a $600,000 contract extension, a major deal for the time, and was on the verge of a breakout year. He had been a first-round pick in 1973 and had improved every season. That night in Oakland ended it all. Stingley spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair, but he became a symbol of resilience. He advocated for spinal injury awareness and inspired many with his attitude and grace. In 2007, at just 55 years old, he passed away from complications related to his injury. His case remains one of the most tragic and impactful injuries in NFL history, a reminder of how quickly the game can take everything from even its brightest young stars. Steve Young, concussions, 1999. Steve Young wasn't just a quarterback. He was a scrambler, a playmaker, and one of the smartest to ever play the position. After spending years behind Joe Montana, he finally took over the San Francisco 49ers and built a Hall of Fame career of his own. He won 2 MVPs, a Super Bowl, and finished with the highest passer rating in NFL history at the time of his retirement. But by 1999, his career was hanging by a thread. In Week 3 against the Arizona Cardinals, Young took a blindside hit from cornerback Aeneas Williams. His head slammed against the turf, and he lay motionless. The stadium went silent. It was the 7th officially recorded concussion of his career, though doctors and teammates have said the real number was likely far higher. This wasn't his first scare. He'd already dealt with blurred vision, dizziness, and memory issues from previous head injuries. But this one was different. He knew it. The doctors knew it. The 49ers knew it. After weeks of testing and second opinions, Steve Young made the call. He was done. At 38 years old, with a Super Bowl ring, MVPs, and a legacy intact, he walked away. Not because he wanted to, but because continuing to play might have meant lifelong brain damage. He later revealed that after the hit, he couldn't even recognize his children for a brief time. That moment crystallized what was at stake. Young's retirement marked a turning point in how the NFL and fans viewed concussions. His story became one of the earliest mainstream warnings about CTE and long-term head trauma, years before the league took it seriously. Today, he's healthy, successful, and a respected analyst. But he remains one of the most high-profile examples of a superstar whose career was ended not by a broken bone, but by invisible injuries the NFL is still grappling with today. Johnny Knox, spinal injury, 2011. Johnny Knox was never supposed to be a star. A 5th-round pick out of Abilene Christian in 2009, he entered the NFL with blazing speed and underdog energy, and for a moment, he became the Chicago Bears' most exciting playmaker. In his first 2 seasons, Knox racked up over 1,800 receiving yards, made the Pro Bowl as a return specialist, and looked like a deep threat weapon in the making. But in Week 15 of the 2011 season, everything changed in an instant. During a game against the Seattle Seahawks, Knox went out for a pass but fumbled after a hit. As he dove to recover the ball, a Seahawks defender did the same from the opposite direction. The two collided, helmet to helmet, and Knox's body bent backwards in a horrifying, unnatural way. He lay there motionless, his face twisted in pain. Trainers rushed out, but he couldn't get up. He had suffered a devastating spinal cord injury, damaging a vertebra and requiring immediate spinal fusion surgery. Though he avoided paralysis, the injury was so severe that walking again became a bigger concern than football. Knox spent over a year rehabbing, learning to walk properly and regain strength. But it wasn't enough. Despite every effort, he never regained the physical function needed to play professionally again. In 2013, at just 26 years old, Johnny Knox officially retired. He walked away from football with a body that still leaned forward when he stood. He later admitted he couldn't run, jump, or even stand straight for extended periods. A sharp contrast to the speedster he once was. Knox's career lasted only 3 seasons, but his story became a haunting reminder of the violence of the game. Not from a helmet-to-helmet hit, but from a desperate hustle play gone wrong. He didn't suffer a hit while celebrating or showboating. He was just fighting for the ball. Wendell Davis, bilateral patellar tendon tear, 1993. Wendell Davis was a dependable, polished wide receiver for the Chicago Bears. Not flashy, but reliable. A former LSU All-American, he was known for precise route running, soft hands, and smart play. From 1989 to 1991, Davis quietly became a top target, putting up back-to-back 600-plus yard seasons, and heading into 1993, he was set to play a major role in Chicago's offense. But on October 10th, 1993, in a game against the Philadelphia Eagles, something happened that even seasoned trainers had never seen. On a routine deep route, Davis planted his feet in the turf at Veterans Stadium to make a cut, and both of his kneecaps literally exploded. There was no contact, no tackle, just a sudden, gruesome collapse. The AstroTurf caught his cleats, and the torque on his body did the rest. Davis tore the patellar tendons in both knees simultaneously, detaching them completely. Trainers later said it looked like his knees shot up into his thighs. That's how severe the rupture was. It was the kind of injury you wouldn't expect to happen in the NFL, but rather in a freak accident. And it changed everything. Doctors weren't sure he'd walk properly again, let alone run. He spent 2 full years rehabbing, undergoing major surgeries, and attempting a comeback. In 1995, he signed with the Colts and gave it one last shot. But his legs simply couldn't support the rigors of the game. He retired shortly after. Wendell Davis's injury became a case study in the dangers of artificial turf, especially the older generation surfaces used in the 90s, like the one at Veterans Stadium. His case helped push conversations forward about player safety and field standards across the league. He didn't leave with records or rings, but Davis left with something heavier. A cautionary tale that still echoes today in every discussion about turf versus grass. Joe Thyman, compound leg fracture, 1985. Joe Thyman was at the height of a remarkable career with Washington when it all came crashing down, literally. On November 18, 1985, during a Monday Night Football game against the New York Giants, a former league MVP, a Super Bowl champion, and the face of the franchise, Thyman was still going strong at age 36, leading an offense filled with veteran talent and playoff expectations. But in the second quarter of that nationally televised game, a broken play turned into one of the most infamous injuries in sports history. Thyman dropped back on a flea flicker, hoping to catch the Giants off guard. Instead, Lawrence Taylor, the most feared pass rusher in football, crashed through the line. With help from linebacker Harry Carson, Taylor wrapped up Thyman and brought him down, and the quarterback's right leg snapped in two. Viewers at home saw it live. Taylor saw it and instantly knew something was wrong. He jumped up and frantically waved for medical help. The image of Thyman laying on the field, his leg grotesquely twisted, became etched into NFL history. He had suffered a compound fracture of the tibia and fibula, one of the worst in league memory. Surgery was immediate. The recovery was intense, but Thyman would never take another snap. He officially retired in 1986 after spending almost a year rehabbing in hopes of a return. The injury had not only shattered bones, it ended the career of one of the most durable quarterbacks of his era. What made it even more symbolic was who delivered the hit. Lawrence Taylor, the game's most disruptive defender, essentially ushering in a new era of defense as Thyman, a throwback to an older style of quarterbacking, was forced out. Today, Thyman is remembered not just for the injury, but for everything he accomplished before it. He remains a Super Bowl winner, a Pro Bowler, and one of Washington's all-time greats. But that play, that moment, remains one of the most chilling reminders of how quickly football can change a life. Dante Copepper, knee injury, 2005. Dante Copepper was one of the most physically gifted quarterbacks the NFL had ever seen. At 6 feet 4 inches, 260 pounds, with a rocket arm and surprising mobility, he was the perfect dual-threat weapon for the early 2000s. In 2004, he had a season for the ages, throwing for 4,717 yards, 39 touchdowns, and finishing runner-up to Peyton Manning in the MVP race. But the following year, in Week 8 of the 2005 season, his career took a devastating turn. Facing the Carolina Panthers, Culpepper scrambled to his right, trying to make a play. As he planted his leg, he was hit low, and his knee bent in a way knees aren't supposed to. The result? A triple ligament tear. The ACL, MCL, and PCL in his right knee were all completely shredded. It was a catastrophic injury, the kind normally seen in car crashes. Copepper was done for the year, and truthfully, done as the player he once was. He had surgery and began rehab, but his recovery didn't go smoothly. By 2006, he was traded to the Miami Dolphins, who hoped he could regain form, but he couldn't run like he used to. He couldn't move in the pocket. His mechanics had changed. The magic was gone. Over the next few years, he bounced around the Raiders, the Lions, but it never clicked again. His once massive frame now worked against him. The very mobility that made him so dangerous had been taken away, and he never fully adapted to a pocket-only style of play. Copepper retired unofficially in 2009, a shell of the player who once looked like the future of the NFL. His injury didn't just end a career, it ended what could have been a Hall of Fame arc, and in a league that's always chasing the next big quarterback, Dante Copepper's rise and fall became a cautionary tale of just how fragile even the most dominant careers can be. Tony Boselli, shoulder injuries, 2002. Tony Boselli was supposed to be the blueprint. The first ever draft pick in Jacksonville Jaguars history, Boselli was taken second overall in 1995, and he lived up to the hype instantly. At 6 feet 7 inches, 320 pounds, he was a rare combination of size, strength, and elite footwork. For years, he was the gold standard at left tackle, shutting down legends like Bruce Smith and Jason Taylor in their prime. From 1996 to 2000, Boselli made 5 straight Pro Bowls and was named first-team All-Pro 3 times. He anchored one of the league's most dangerous offenses and helped lead Jacksonville to 2 AFC championship games in their first 5 seasons. It was one of the fastest rises for an expansion team in NFL history, and Boselli was the franchise cornerstone. But behind the dominance, something was breaking down: his shoulders. Injuries had nagged him for years, but by 2001, they became impossible to ignore. Boselli underwent multiple surgeries, trying to repair torn labrums and rotator cuff damage. He missed most of the 2001 season and was left unprotected in the expansion draft. The Houston Texans selected him as their marquee acquisition for their inaugural 2002 roster. He never played a snap for them. The damage was too severe. Despite grueling rehab and multiple attempts at a comeback, Boselli couldn't get his strength or flexibility back. The pain lingered, and in 2003, at just 30 years old, he officially retired. Tony Boselli played only 7 seasons in the NFL, but his impact was massive. He was so dominant in that short window that he eventually became the first Jacksonville Jaguar inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2022. His story is a powerful reminder. Sometimes, even the best-built players can't withstand the grind. And sometimes, a career doesn't need to be long to be legendary. Nick Collins, neck injury, 2011. Nick Collins was the heartbeat of the Green Bay Packers' secondary, a 3-time Pro Bowler, Super Bowl champion, and one of the most underrated safeties of his era. Drafted in the 2nd round in 2005, Collins quickly became known for his range, instincts, and big play ability. In Super Bowl 45, he had a pick 6 off Ben Roethlisberger, a defining moment in Green Bay's championship run. But just 2 games into the 2011 season, everything changed. In a Week 2 game against the Carolina Panthers, Collins went in to make what looked like a routine tackle on running back Jonathan Stewart. But as he dove, his head collided awkwardly with Stewart's body, and he landed on the turf in a way that immediately raised alarms. He didn't get up. Medical staff rushed onto the field. Collins was eventually carted off on a stretcher, his neck immobilized, and taken to a nearby hospital. The diagnosis? A herniated disc in his neck that required cervical fusion surgery. At first, there was hope. The surgery was successful, and Collins remained optimistic. But as the months passed, it became clear returning to the NFL and risking further damage was too great a risk. The Packers released him in 2012, and though he still wanted to play, no team would clear him medically. His career ended at just 28 years old. What made it so brutal was how fast it all happened. Collins had just entered his prime. He was one of the best safeties in football, with 21 career interceptions, 4 defensive touchdowns, and a growing legacy. And in a single moment, it was all gone. To this day, Nick Collins remains a what-if story for Packers fans. a player who was building a Hall of Fame case before it was suddenly taken away. Dennis Byrd, paralysis, 1992. Dennis Byrd was a rising star on the New York Jets defensive line, a second-round pick out of Tulsa in 1989. He quickly earned a reputation as a relentless pass rusher. In just his second year, Byrd notched 13 sacks, and by 1992, at just 26 years old, he was considered the future of the Jets defense. Then came November 29th, 1992, a day that would change everything. In a game against the Kansas City Chiefs, Byrd lined up for what seemed like a standard play. As quarterback Dave Krieg dropped back, Byrd surged through the line, aiming for the sack. But at the last second, Krieg stepped up in the pocket, and Byrd collided headfirst into his own teammate, Scott Merzerow. There was no movement. Byrd crumpled to the turf, instantly paralyzed from the neck down. Medical staff stabilized his spine and rushed him to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed a fractured C5 vertebra, a serious spinal injury that often results in permanent paralysis. For a time, it seemed Byrd would never walk again. But in one of the most inspiring recoveries in NFL history, Dennis Byrd regained the ability to walk, defying doctors' initial prognosis. Less than a year later, he walked to midfield as an honorary captain for the Jets' 1993 season opener, bringing an entire stadium to tears. Though he would never play football again, Byrd became a motivational speaker, sharing his story of resilience and faith. His jersey number, 90, was temporarily retired by the Jets and permanently honored after his tragic passing in a car accident in 2016. Dennis Byrd's story is about more than a career-ending injury. It's about courage. It's about defiance in the face of unimaginable odds. And it's a legacy that still echoes through the halls of the Jets organization. Mike Utley, paralysis, 1991. Mike Utley was the kind of player every team wants on the offensive line: tough, disciplined, and relentless. Drafted by the Detroit Lions in the third round of the 1989 NFL Draft, Utley quickly became a starting right guard, anchoring the line for a young team built around Barry Sanders. But in Week 12 of the 1991 season, tragedy struck in one of the most devastating moments in franchise history. During a game against the Los Angeles Rams, Utley dropped back in pass protection, something he had done hundreds of times before. As he engaged with the defender, his head was forced downward, and he collapsed to the turf. Trainers rushed out, and the stadium fell into silence. He gave a thumbs up as he was carted off, a moment that became iconic. But hours later, the truth came out. Mike Utley had fractured his 6th and 7th cervical vertebrae, suffering a spinal cord injury that left him paralyzed from the chest down. He would never walk again. The injury ended his career at just 25 years old, but that thumbs up became a symbol of resilience and spirit. It inspired not only his teammates, who went on to make the playoffs that season, but also fans around the country. Utley embraced the spotlight in the aftermath, founding the Mike Utley Foundation, dedicated to spinal cord injury, research, and awareness. He became a public advocate, giving motivational speeches and working tirelessly to improve care and outcomes for others living with paralysis. His name is still remembered in Detroit, not just for what happened that day on the turf, but for how he chose to respond afterward. Mike Utley's career may have ended in a moment, but his legacy is defined by everything that came after. By the way, I'm going to be posting a lot here, so it would mean a lot if you subscribed and dropped a like for the algorithm.